Hi everybody. This is a lecture on the basic body, animal form, and function. So we're basically from here on out going to be talking about human mammals really, and human sort of everything is based on human in terms of the systems that we're going to be covering. Right now we're just going to kind of review some animal characteristics and some of the reasons why the body form is associated with function. One of the reasons that body form is associated with function has to do with energy exchange. So you might remember talking about in Core 1 how a cell is going to be getting materials and energy from the outside. They're going to be using that material and or energy to do chemical reactions within the cell. And they are going to be getting rid of waste products, including materials like, especially, for example, gases, carbon dioxide, and other waste products in terms of molecules or things that the cell doesn't need. So all of that together was called metabolism. The energy exchange is usually done, there's various ways of energy exchange. As you might recall from the beginning of the semester, we talked about autotrophs and heterotrophs and the different types of those. So that is one of the constraints. And related to that is the surface area to volume ratio that we talked about in Core 1 in regards to cell size, remembering that larger cells have a much smaller surface area to volume ratio, meaning that they have a harder time getting things in and out of the cell and distributed throughout the cell because their volume is much greater compared to their surface area because of the way it interacts. The other thing is that a lot of organisms are multicellular. Most organisms are multicellular. A unicellular organism and a multicellular organism would be under different constraints. And then the other real important factor that you've noticed throughout talking about the animal groups is whether the organism lives in water or if they're on land, and the problems with drying out if they are on land, and or how the exchange occurs if they're in water. So we're going to kind of always talk about things sort of in an evolutionary development in that way. In other words, what are the basic systems in water, and then how does that change when we go to land? Okay, another thing is, a cell, besides energy, getting energy in and out, is also obtaining, water and nutrients and so forth, like we've been talking about. One thing that affects that is habitat, water versus land, but also on land, like where on land are we talking about? A pond? Are we talking about a river, a lake, a forest, a desert? There's different factors, and then also their ecological niche. In other words, what is the organism doing in their environment, and how is that affecting how they're going to be doing this exchange and their needs, and including reproductive needs and nest sites and things like that. All right, so that's kind of your basic sort of what we're looking at. And we want to just review, what an animal cell is. So an animal cell is different than a plant cell. How? That's what I would ask you if you were in class. Of course, we know that animal cells do not have a cell wall. They only have a cell membrane on the outside surrounded by a glycocalyx or extracellular matrix that allows for exchange materials between a somewhat aqueous medium from one cell to the next. That aqueous medium is called epithelial water or interstitial water, and we will talk a little bit more about that later. And then the cells are held together by desmosomes, tight junctions, and they exchange information through gap junctions, which is basically a channel from cell to cell, so you can pass things from the cytoplasm of one cell to the cytoplasm of the next. And otherwise, the animal cell is similar to a plant cell. Another difference is things like centrioles, which we talked about when we were talking about mitosis in Core 1, mitosis, meiosis. And then also they have cilia and flagella. So those are like the main differences. If you put cells together, they become a tissue. A tissue is a group of cells that do a common function. Of course, we're talking about multicellular organisms here. So a single cell would not be having any tissues because it's only one cell, so it can't be a group of cells. So we were talking about multicellular organisms, and usually in multicellular organisms, even the most simple, at least have an outside layer and an inside layer. Okay, so those would be tissues. So in this case, we're talking about mainly vertebrates, and in particular, we're really focusing on mammals. There are 4 different tissue types. All right, so we're going to go through the different tissue types. If you look over here, let's move this for a second. You can see the 4 tissue types written up on the board, so you can take notes on the 4 tissue types. All right, so we're going to start with the epithelial. Epithelial There are a lot of different epithelial types, as you can see from this diagram. What we see up here is we see different types that are located in different places. So this diagram is trying to show you where you're likely to see some of these epithelial cells. Now, what epithelial cells are cells that are lining either the outside or the inside. And one of the things that they do is they make a continuous mass of cells that is protecting the body either from whatever is trying to get into the actual inside portion of the body by different features. If it's on the inside, it might be allowing certain things to get through or into the cell or not, so regulating how things get in and out. If it's part of a duct, for example, it's just keeping whatever's in the duct as opposed to going into your body fluids. And if it's on the outside, really it's just trying to protect the outside. In other words, protect you from things and trying to invade your body like bacteria, etc., but also make a layer that can get cut and can get replaced and, sort of be a protective layer. All right, so just, going around, we'll go in a clockwise direction. So this is stratified columnar. What that means is you see the columns of cells, and then the under tissue layers are somewhat stratified. In other words, they have their nuclei not necessarily in a line. So this has got this layer and this layer. That is the strata or layers of different cells that are in this epithelial type. This is likely to be part of the colon, all right? Simple columnar, these are just cells that are long and thin, all right, usually for absorbing water. These cells, pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelial. This might be part of your trachea. The cilia are to help keep dust and things like that out of your trachea, for example. This is pseudostratified because they really are long columnar cells, but their nuclei aren't in one location or aren't in one layer like they are over here. Cuboidal is usually part of a duct of some sort. And simple squamous epithelial can be the linings of things, both outside and inside. And then you have the stratified squamous. This is like where there gets to be a lot of activity, like the inside of your esophagus, for example. All right, so those are the different type of epithelial cells. All right, so epithelials are protective. They are also, most glands are epithelial cells that are modified. For example, a mammary gland is an epithelial cell that is a modified not just a cell, but epithelial cells that are modified for milk production. So those are, and your salivary glands are also those. Okay, so next is connective.